Hey guys, tonight we step into the silent heart of Rome, where moonlight pours over ancient travertine and the air tastes faintly of incense and history. You feel the stones humming beneath your fingertips as you inch toward a hidden door carved with cryptic symbols, because if there's anything more comforting than wandering subterranean catacombs at midnight, it's knowing you probably won't survive this without at least one goosebump or mild existential crisis. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the chat, because nothing bonds night owls like shared insomnia. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the courtyard behind St. Peter's Basilica. It's the faint echo of your footsteps dancing off marble columns that have seen more centuries than most countries. The Vatican Secret Archives, officially established by Pope Paul V in 1612, lie just beyond a heavy wooden door. Its surface scarred by centuries of rusting nails and whispered promises. Historians still argue whether this archive was truly secret or simply exclusive, but you know better. Exclusivity feels a lot like secrecy when you're on the wrong side of the hinges. The lock's iron teeth grind and turn, releasing a sigh that could wake half the Swiss Guard. You push inside and the temperature drops by at least 10 degrees. A prickly chill skitters across your spine. It's partly because you're acutely aware that these walls have swallowed every conspiracy theory you've ever heard. It's fringe aficionados claim there's a hidden wing containing letters from Atlantis's last king. Yes, that Atlantis, though mainstream scholars dismiss it as maritime romance. Still, you can't help but wonder if the archives guard a tattered map of sunken palaces, or merely boast exceptionally damp medieval scrolls. Rows of shelves stretch into darkness, each shelf sagging under the weight of leather-bound tomes. You inhale, bracing yourself for that unmistakable scent, the poetry of musty parchment spiked with a hint of mold. Like a library that's had one too many rainy day fever dreams. If you thought your grandma's attic was dusty, you haven't met these volumes. Jokes aside, one misplaced sneeze here could unleash a papal papyrus avalanche worthy of its own documentary series. As you navigate a narrow aisle, your torchlight flickers, casting giant, winking shadows on the vellum spines. You catch a glimpse of an ornate key hanging on a nearby hook, its handle shaped like a cherub's face, eyes eternally squinting as if judging your life choices. They say this key belongs to a secret brotherhood of custodians sworn to guard documents that might rewrite everything you thought you knew. Historians still argue whether such a society ever existed, or if it's pure myth spun by bored monks looking for gossip. A soft scrape echoes behind you, and you pause. Your heartbeat thrums like a mischievous drum, daring you to keep moving. You slip between shelves until you find a book stamped with the papal seal of Innocent III, an ordinary decree on tithes. Appear to believe the official catalog, but rumor insists that coded messages are embedded in the wax seal itself, whispered prophecies only legible under candlelight. It's enough to make you consider taking night vision goggles on your next pilgrimage. You slide the volume off its perch, and it releases a little cloud of dust that sparkles in your halo of light. Your fingers trace the embossed crest, and you imagine the hand that pressed it centuries ago, unknowing of the secrets it would guard. Fringe theorists claim this tome holds the key to a philosopher's stone recipe hidden in marginalia, while others scoff and call it medieval doodling. Maybe those doodles are just bored scribbles, but maybe they're a formula for immortality. Historians still argue whether such a recipe was ever more than alchemist wishful thinking. Your torch dims again, and you mutter a sleepy joke about needing AA batteries more reliable than Vatican electricity. You slip the book under your arm and step deeper into the vault's throat, where silence reigns supreme. Moments like this, you half expect the walls to lean in for a conspiratorial whisper, eager to spill their secrets if only you lean close enough to listen. But even in this hushed cathedral of knowledge, you carry a modern itch for screens and notifications. You imagine live streaming this descent. Smash that like button for more PayPal intrigue, though part of you suspects no Wi-Fi could survive these depths. And yet, here you are, heart thumping, breath caught, welcoming every shiver as proof you're still very much alive. Remember that feeling, that delicious mix of dread and curiosity? As we move on to trace who first locked away these mysteries and why, you slip the ancient papal decree back onto its shelves, still feeling the cherub's snotty stare follow a narrowing corridor painted in flickering amber light. The air here tastes of warmed wax and old ink, as if the tunnel itself scribbles secrets whenever you exhale. Your footsteps echo against rough-hewn stone, joining an unbroken chain of midnight wanderers that stretches back nearly to millennia. Long before Pope Paul V swung open these doors in 1612 to create the Archivum Secretum Vaticanum, earlier caretakers tucked away papal letters in makeshift closets and old wine cellars. It's a mainstream fact. The archive's official birth is on November 1st, 1612. When they were formally compartmentalized and locked with triple-sealed keys, but you're chasing ghosts that slink even farther into the past the Renaissance. Pope's fine croziers and Beethoven's silent harmonies, all the way to the dying embers of late antiquity. Historians still argue whether the first record keepers were humble clerics in plain robes or ambitious lay secretaries itching to rise through the Vatican's ranks. As you trudge onward, the stone underfoot shifts from smooth travertine to jagged cobblestone, making you question your choice of footwear. Your elbow brushes against damp, mossy walls, and you imagine those walls sticky with ink drippings from frantic scribes. Fringe legends whisper of a secret trove where scribes inscribed lost Apollo oracles onto vellum collection, supposedly stolen from Delphi's ruins and smuggled to Rome under the nose of pagan watchdogs. You almost chuckle at the image. A toga-clad courier sprinting through Roman traffic, clutching papyrus scrolls as if they were lottery tickets. A low hum reverberates from somewhere ahead, part reverent chant, part unsettling murmur. You pause, lean in, and swear you hear the cadence of ancient Latin slipping past the stones. It's enough to make you glance over your shoulder, half expecting a ghostly monk to offer you a candle. Instead, you find a single iron chest bolted to the floor. It's cold to the touch, like the hand of every archivist who ever succumbed to fever in these tunnels. A nearby plaque, so worn you can barely trace its letters, hints that this chest once held Constantine's own correspondence with early bishops. Mainstream nod to 4th century record keeping. But that's just the surface. You grip the heavy lid and lift it with surprising ease, revealing nothing more than stacks of brittle folios tied with frayed twine. Still, fringe enthusiasts claim that slipped between those strapped bundles is a papyrus speculum, an alleged mirror into Christ's private reflections, penned by a priest who swore Apollo himself dictated the words in a dream. Skeptics dismiss it as pious nonsense. You, however, tuck the idea into your mind's back pocket, just in case. The corridor widens into a cruciform chamber, its vaulted ceiling dripping water onto a mosaic floor. You step over warped tiles embedded with faded Latin mottos and feel the water slick beneath your boots. There's a faint hiss as the moisture meets your body heat, stirring up a cloud of dust motes that sparkle like micro glowworms in your lantern's beam. You lie down for a second, experimenting with true ASMR vibes. Let the echoes of dripping water lull you. But your reverie is broken by an impatient cough. Above you, carved into a beam, are the initials AD 337. It's hardly legible. But mainstream records do place Athanasius in Rome around that time, busy shipping Bibles and polemics back and forth with Alexandria. You trace the chiseled mark with your fingertip, imagining Athanasius himself pausing here to sign his name with a quill. Fringe biographers argue that Athanasius hid a letter in this very chamber, one that names the Valley of the Moon in Eden, but mainstream scholars still debate whether that valley ever actually existed, or if early Christians conflated it with Babylon. A sudden drip lands on your shoulder. You sit up, wiping away a droplet that tastes faintly of iron. And you can't help but make a sleepy quip. Great, even the stones have hydration routines. Jokes aside, this chamber feels ancient in a way that defies carbon dating like the walls. Remember? Both empires rising and scientific papers on papyrus deterioration. You follow a narrow stair spiraling upward, each step hewn roughly by masons, whose chisels gave them carpal tunnel long before it was cool. Your pulse steadies as you gain height, and you spy fresco fragments of cherubs, different from the Iron Key's scowling cherub. These ones are cherubic indeed, frolicking in the remnants of a once grand mural. It's a reminder that early Vatican custodians didn't just hoard scrolls. They commissioned art to protect and glorify what they'd stashed away. Historians still argue whether these murals were commissioned by Pope Damascus in the 7th century or by a shadowy cardinal who funded underground chapels. Upstairs, you emerge into a slender gallery lit by tiny windows too high to peer through. You dust off a stone plaquette announcing the archivist's chamber. AD 847. Mainstream sources confirm that by the 9th century, Carolingian scribes were sending bundles of corrected Gregorian chants here for eternal safekeeping. You gaze at a worn wooden desk framed by a skeletal candelabrum, imagining scriveners hunched over manuscripts, pausing only to sip Posca-Roman vinegar water, just to keep their throats from drying out. But beneath that practical slice of daily archival life lies a quirkier tale. Some say the earliest archivists used snail mucus instead of paste to bind their codices. The theory goes, snail trails create an invisible seal that phages ink molecules, locking words into the parchment forever. You almost brush your palm over the desk's surface, half expecting to leave a snail trail fingerprint. Yet, mainstream conservators doubt the snail mucus myth holds up in lab tests. And historians still argue whether it was ever more than an alchemist's daydream. You stretch your arms overhead, the stiff breeze from an unseen vent brushing the back of your neck. Despite the centuries of dust, you catch a whiff of lemongrass, a cleaning agent used by monks in the 14th century, mixed with the unmistakable aroma of decaying leather. It's the smell of secrets preserved and secrets rotting simultaneously. You inhale deeply, then exhale, feeling strangely comforted by the archive's layered scents, like an adult version of burying your face in your grandma's quilt. With every footfall, you're acutely aware you're treading on decisions of cardinals long gone, which scrolls to burn, which to bind, which to hide. What started as a handful of papal letters in tattered satchels transformed into an empire of vellum, a testament to human obsession with preservation. You pause beneath a grand archway, tracing its grooves as if reading the archive's spine. Fringe theorists propose that this arch was built atop buried pagan temples to disguise subterranean chambers. Mainstream architects, though, catalog it simply as a sturdy 9th century reinforcement. Historians still argue whether there's any pagan stonework beneath the marble tiles. You lean against the wall, gather your scattered thoughts, and realize that this origin story is more than just dates and decrees. It's a story of people, scribes, clerks, cardinals, who feared oblivion and wrestled history into submission. And as you stand in this chamber, where time seems to pause mid-breath, You sense that every subsequent step, every drawer you'll open owes its existence to these early custodians. They whispered to worms and carved sigils into beams so that centuries later, you'd wander a candlelit corridor, listening to the past exhale beneath your feet. You press onward, torchlight dancing across the vault's undulating walls as the corridor branches into a bewildering maze. Each turn flips your perspective. What looked like a dead end morphs into a passage stretching deeper beneath St. Peter's foundations. You pause to inhale, tasting fine particulate dust that settles on your tongue like pulverized chalk. It's a reminder that you're literally breathing history, one inhalation at a time, no face mask required, apparently. Historians still argue whether this sprawling network extends into ancient Roman catacombs or remains wholly separate under papal governance. The air here is cooler. It's almost damp enough to nick your throat, and you can't help glancing up at the ceiling ribs, dripping condensation onto your flickering beam. Each rivulet smacks softly against worn stone, making a rhythm you swear could lull you into a light doze. You didn't have that creeping suspicion you'd forget which way you came from. Fringe lore insists that some corridors were lined with crocodile dung bricks to repel moisture in Egyptian waterproofing tricks smuggled into the Vatican by crusaders who fancied themselves part-time architects. You almost laugh at the image of medieval monks squinting at green-streaked mortar, debating if it smelled worse than last night's supper. Your footsteps echo clack, swish, thump like a creepy percussion track, underscoring your midnight. Spelunk, you lift your phone to snap the path's junctions and etched crudely by Rancan file. Custodians in the 17th century, only to realize your battery died 15 minutes ago. Perfect. Now you've got nothing but an antique torch and your wits, which, judging by how often you're twisting in circles, aren't the sharpest. Joke's on you. Google Maps has nothing on this labyrinth. Around a corner, you spot a steel hatch concealed beneath a tapestry of fungal growth. It's not on any official blueprint you've seen. Its mainstream records do note a security upgrade. In the 19th century, when Pope Gregory XVI installed reinforced doors along key corridors. But there's no mention of this mossy panel. You run your fingers over a primitive latch and feel its cold metal pulse under your palm. Scholars still argue whether that 19th century project was purely functional or a pretext to build new wings for clandestine collections. You flip the latch, and the door groans open to reveal a narrow spiral staircase descending even further. Your heart ticks up a beat as you imagine twisting down into a sanctum reserved for the highest-ranking archivists. If the cherub-faced key you saw earlier belonged to anyone, it would be them. You step in, counting each stair softly to avoid dizzying yourself, and try not to picture your ancestor as a clown car. One more step, and we'll never see daylight again. At the bottom, the air smells different. Stale cedar mixed with something metallic. You glance at the wall's copper sheeting, once lustrous, now tarnished like a forgotten penny. Tiny hooks line the panels, each one an anchor for a leather docket or simple scroll. An embossed marker reads Anno Domini 1843, tying it to Pope Gregory's renovation. Mainstream sources confirm that in 1843 scholars cataloged over 150,000 manuscript volumes in this lower labyrinth alone. And yet, the smell and setting feel older, like this subterranean room has soaked up secrets since the Middle Ages, if not earlier. You lift a scroll labeled Codex Citharae and unroll it carefully. The vellum crackles, and for a moment you expect to see neat musical notation. Instead, you find symbols that look like star charts woven into liturgical psalms, a curious blend of astronomy and theology. Fringe researchers claim this hybrid text was penned by a medieval astronomer priest who believed the stars sang Gregorian chants at night. More sober voices dismiss it as marginal doodling born from too many clay pot brews. Historians still argue whether such experimental codices ever influenced mainstream church practices. Further down the hall, you pass a tiny alcove illuminated by a single flickering gas lamp, surprising in this electric age. You crouch to peer inside and find a rusted metal box. The latch snaps off in your gloved hand, dropping onto the stone floor with a hollow ping. Inside are folded sheets of parchment. In a language you don't immediately recognize, characters twisting like vines. You hold one up to the light and feel the unmistakable roughness of papyrus, not vellum. That's strange. Papyrus had largely fallen out of favor by the 12th century. Fringe enthusiasts whisper that the box houses letters by a secretive Cathar sect who slipped through Rome while fleeing persecution. Skeptics dismiss it, saying the parchments are 19th century theatrical props. Historians still argue whether any authentic Cathar documents have ever surfaced in the Vatican. Your torchlight flutters across the flameless candle sconces spaced along the corridor. You brace one hand against the stone for balance as images flicker on damp patches frescoes showing cherubs battling serpents. It's a curious callback to the cherubic key's defiant glare. You wonder if those cherub murals were meant to guard the corridors or simply decorate them. Scholars still argue whether the iconography was commissioned by Pope Innocent or a private donor obsessed with angelic symbolism. A sudden breeze tousles your hair, though no obvious vent is nearby. You shiver and joke aloud. Great, now my haircut is haunted. But the breeze carries a whisper of frankincense, perhaps from candles in a chapel above, drifting through hidden grates. It reminds you of that vaulted chamber in Section 2, where water dripped in gentle ASMR cadence. You breathe in, letting the scent calm your nerves, then exhale slowly, acutely aware of the labyrinth's scale. At this depth, you're surrounded by over 24 branching corridors and dozens more side passages. A subterranean city mapped by cardinals who never foresaw tour guides with YouTube channels. You lean back and rest your shoulder against a carved niche, your torch held high, enough to reveal uneven footing. Moss blankets the threshold of a narrow doorway that seems both intentional and forgotten. Carved into the lintel are the word silentium and a faded date, MDCC LXXVII. If you convert that, you get 1777, smack in the Age of Enlightenment. Mainstream archivists record a surge of Enlightenment-era acquisitions in the 18th century, as scholars uprooted collections from Paris and Florence, fearing revolutionary mobs. But this alcove was left unmentioned. Historians still argue whether it was too small to catalog or reserved for texts so combustible they dared not list them. You push through the moss, disturbing a colony of tiny springtails that scatter like confetti. They land on your jacket, tickling your skin, and you stifle a giggle. Only in a library this underground could insects have a privacy policy. You flick them away gently. It's promising you won't stream the pest control documentary here, at least not tonight. Straight ahead. The corridor narrows into a tight, almost claustrophobic passage. Stone walls so close you could sprawl both arms and touch opposite sides. You duck your head and shuffle forward, breath shallow, till you see a sliver of light ahead, a narrow exit ramp leading upward. Relief floods in as you realize this labyrinthine gauntlet was designed to deter all but the most determined. You exhale, hot air puffing in your torch's glow. But before you ascend, you pause to etch a mental map. Turn left at the crocodile dung bricks, right past the Adonine terrace, straight at the papyrus box. Then up the ramp on your right. You push off the wall and step onto the ramp's smooth steps. Curious if you'll emerge beside the cherub key hook from Section 1 or above the Athanasius chamber in Section 2. Either way, you're deeper into the archives than most tourists, even most historians, can claim. and you're only getting started. You emerge from the spiral ramp into a low-ceilinged antechamber, where the air shifts from damp earth to something warmer, like stepping into a vaulted hearth without the fire. Your torchlight dances off dozens of keys hanging on rusted hooks, each one an iron skein that once clanked against doorframes and whispered of locked-away truths. You brush your fingertips along a key the size of your forearm, its carved handle depicting two crossed keys, now the universal emblem of papal authority. It's borrowed from the keys given to Peter the Apostle, a mainstream symbol stamped on Vatican seals since at least the 17th century. Historians still argue whether those keys were meant literally or metaphorically when they first appeared in papal heraldry. Next to that emblematic key swings a far smaller one. It's almost delicate, its handle twisted into the semblance of a sleeping cherub. You pause, instantly reminded of the cherub-faced key in section 1 that glowered at you from its hook, as if judging your motives. Q. You chuckle softly, your breath echoing in the chamber, and wonder if there's a hierarchy of cherub, some sleepy, some stern, and whether each one guards documents of varying scandalousness. Fringe storytellers claim that these cherubs correspond to a secret brotherhood of Vatican custodians. The Custodes Tenebrarum swore oaths centuries ago under flickering candles to protect the books that could burn kingdoms. Skeptics dismiss the brotherhood as a flight of fancy woven by dramatists. Still, you tuck that myth into your thoughts like a bookmark in a forbidden codex. The keys hang in tiers on an iron rack that arches overhead, reminding you of a ribcage made of steel. You lean back against the wall and run your gaze up and down the rack, counting more than 100 distinct designs. Some are chunky, robust enough to subdue a boar. Others are slender, almost fragile, as if destined for tiny locks hidden inside a bishop's private desk. You trace the grooves in one particularly ornate key, the handle crowned with fleur-de-lis sand. Wonder if it belonged to Cardinal Richelieu. Its agents reportedly corresponded with the Vatican during the 30 Years' War. It's a tantalizing thought, though mainstream correspondence records list only official envoys. Historians still argue whether clandestine backchannels existed between France and the Holy See. In that era, your fingers slide to a key that's oddly warm to the touch. You jerk your hand back, startled, then realize the warmth is residual from your palm's heat. You crack a sleepy joke. Even the keys are in on this heist. You swap torches in your offhand to get a better look. The keys bit forms an intricate zigzag pattern that fits a lock like a jigsaw puzzle piece. You imagine sliding it into an iron lock, turning it, and unleashing a hidden doorway to rooms piled floor to ceiling with banned treatises on heliocentrism. Or perhaps papal love letters deemed too spicy for public consumption. Leaning closer, you notice fine engraving along the shank. The date, MDC CLXX VI 1776, Liberty's birth year in America. No less. You squint, considering the irony. A key made the same year British colonists declared independence now chains up documents of infallibility. Fringe theorists argue that this key unlocked a private vault where European revolutionaries traded subversive pamphlets under the Pope's nose. More measured voices point out there's no direct evidence of such exchanges, only tantalizing rumors. Historians still argue whether this key ever turned in any revolutionary lock or simply lay dormant while history roared above. The chamber's hush lulls you into a near drowse, and you swivel your torch to illuminate a narrow niche carved into the wall. Inside lie 3 miniature skeleton keys, so tiny you'll need tweezers to fasten any of them. Beside them rests a dusty scroll sealed with red wax. You break the seal carefully, of course, because you're still allergic to papal prosand. Find a note in spidery handwriting, Custodibus tuae fidei, to the custodians of your faith. The language hints at an oath. And you imagine candlelit circles of archivists swearing loyalty to something larger than themselves. Perhaps they pledge to guard the Codex Gigas or the Devil's Bible. Rumored to contain one page eclipsed in black ink, bearing Faustian invocations. Mainstream records acknowledge that medieval scholars knew of the Codex Gigas in the Emperor's library at Prague, but they make no direct link to the Vatican holdings. Scholars still argue whether a fragment ever migrated south. You tuck the note into your jacket pocket less for theft than for the thrill of carrying a secret oath with you. You step back and survey the rack of keys one last time, noting a keyring dangling on a lower hook. It's encircled by a simple leather strap, incongruous amid all the gilded ironwork. You pull it down and hear a soft jingle, like a wind chime heralding a midnight secret. The ring holds 5 small silver keys each, stamped with a different papal insignia. You imagine that whoever possessed these held sway over multiple chambers. The Inquisition's records room, the papal seal vault, the correspondence safe, the excommunication ledger, and the archive's central control panel. Fringe rumor purports that the strap belonged to a cardinal whose penchant for blackmail required easy transport of the most sensitive locks. Mainstream archivists scoff, noting no inventory ever lists such a versatile set. Historians still argue whether a traveling key set ever passed between clerics as leverage. Your elbow nudges a loose brick in the wall, and you catch it before it falls, revealing a narrow slit. Behind it lies a single key, its handle carved like entwined serpents biting their tails. The Ouroboros motif seems more occult than ecclesiastical, and you can't resist whispering a sarcastic aside. Sure, 'cause salvation needs a snake symbol. You wonder if this key belongs to a chest containing alchemical recipes. Maybe the Philosopher's Stone formula you glimpsed in Section 1's Innocent III decreed rumors. You poke at the slit with a gloved finger, and the key slides free, cold as midnight. Fringe enthusiasts insist that snake keys were reserved for forbidden chambers holding instructions to transcend mortal flesh. Skeptics dismiss this as romantic nonsense. Historians still argue whether any Vatican texts promised supernatural transformation. By now, you're surrounded on all sides by keys with reputations more storied than some monarchs. You pause to twist the Ouroboros key between your fingers, listening to its soft metallic spin, and imagine what door it might open. An oubliette for heretical manuscripts. Us. A sub-basement full of alchemical retorts. Us. A vault dedicated to the Pope's secret poetry. Whatever it is, the key promises agency. The power to decide what knowledge sees light and what must remain forever dark. You replace the serpent key, letting it clink against its neighbors, and take one last, lingering look at the rack. A sleepy smile tugs your lips as you realize that keys, more than any letter or seal, are the true custodians of secrets. They embody both trust and control, tiny iron sentinels that decide the fate of every hidden word. You pocket a mental snapshot of the rack, commit to memory the precise order, and whisper to yourself, now, to find the lock. Your torch dims, and you flick it twice, coaxing it back to life. The chamber's embrace feels warmer now, heavy with promise. And as you step toward the exit arch, you know that the keys you just studied will shape every turn you take, every secret you're bold enough to uncover next. You slip out of the key chamber, the echo of iron bullions jingling at your hip, drift into a low-ceilinged room lined with wooden chests. The air here carries a warm, beeswaxy scent that sticks to your nostrils like a guilty secret, because if there's anything more soothing than drifting soup-brown beeswax on a late spring night, it's knowing those seals might hide prophecies about the end of days. Rows upon rows of shallow drawers beckon, each one labeled with a pope's name in looping 17th century script. You crack open a drawer marked Urban VIII, 1623 to 1644, and inhale the faint tingle of old metal and softened wax. Like a pastry shop where someone forgot to mention the alchemy. Historians still argue whether the use of lead bulla for papal documents began officially with Pope Leo IX in 1059, or traces back even further to informal seals under Pope Hadrian. In the late 8th century, your fingers brush past dozens of wax seals, round, oval, some squashed like melted coins, one pressed into place while the wax was still warm. You pick up one bearing the rooster crest of Pope Gregory I, caked with millennia of dust and whispering tales of early medieval diplomacy. Mainstream sources confirm that Gregory's seals authenticated decrees sent to Frankish kings, ensuring every missive was treated like VIP mail rather than a pity party postcard. But you linger on the more curious ones. A seal with a salamander motif whose edges are strangely serrated, like the bite of a truth-telling serpent. Fringe theorists claim that certain seals contained microscopic inscriptions, prophetic verses, visible only under ultraviolet candlelight, meant to guide future popes through flash floods, plagues, or heretical TikTok trends. Skeptics scoff, but you tuck that possibility beside the serpent key memory from Section 4. Just in case. A slender drawer yields a seal embossed with a star-shaped sunburst and the legend Innocent III, 1198 to 1216. You run your thumb across the cold wax rim and marvel at how a simple hot stamp could carry the weight of crusades, church councils, and excommunications. A tiny crack snaps under your pressure, releasing a whisper of dust motes that prickle your eyelashes. Joking out loud, you murmur, "Great papal flake makeup kit, right here." Nevertheless, you know these seals weren't decorative. Guaranteed authenticity. Historians still argue whether popes ever reused or recycled seals during supply shortages, or simply ordered more batches of wax from Rome's gossip-spinning apothecaries. You shift to a larger chest set against an arched wall, its lids scratched by centuries of impatient archivists. Inside lie dozens of scalloped lead bulla, heavy, cold, and unnervingly silent. One clatters to the floor, its metallic ring echoing like a tiny bell of conspiracy. You catch it and hold it to the torchlight, revealing an inscription in Gothic script. It's from Urban V, dated 1362, and details his decree to send food relief to plague-ravaged villages. It's the sort of mainstream administrative memo that reminds you the Vatican didn't just shroud itself in mystery. It occasionally ran emergency food drives. Yet fringe rumor insists that behind the official text lurked a second, invisible script naming villages the church planned to abandon. Mainstream scholars dismiss it as paranoia, but you smile, storing the rumor for later. A quiet whoosh of your torch turns into a whisper as you notice a sealed parchment tied to a silver seal, stamped with a double-headed eagle, the symbol of the Holy Roman Emperor, not a pope. You tug it free and find a diplomatic letter exchanged between Pope Pius II and Emperor Frederick III in 1458. The parchment's edges are singed, as if someone wanted to ensure no one fiddled with it twice. You quip, "Guess these guys didn't trust email encryption, huh?" Your voice bouncing against stone like a friendly ghost. In reality, such documents cemented alliances, funded military campaigns, and brokered political marriages. Historians still argue whether these imperial papal correspondences shaped the Protestant Reformation's early rumblings or were just polite pen pal letters. You pause to listen. The room is otherwise silent except for the soft hum of your own breathing and the faint tick-tick of settling wax. A sleepy kind of serenity washes over you as you run a thumb down a row of seals that vary in color from golden, yellow to almost black, some tinted by centuries of lamp smoke, others by pigments mixed into the wax. Each color choice probably meant something. Yellow for joy, red for power, black for mourning banishments. But fringe scholars propose a deeper logic, that a color-coded seal conveyed hidden theological alignment. Augustinian. Tommy Stick, Franciscan. So only initiates could decipher which pope leaned toward mystical visions and which toward scholastic debate. Skeptics note there's no Vatican memo listing these color codes. Historians still argue whether medieval officials embedded such nuanced signals into their seal-making. You lean back and let your torchlight flicker across a large, iron-bound chest sitting in the corner. Despite its impressive bulk, the lock is missing its seals. Someone must have pried it open long ago. You crack it tentatively and discover an assortment of blank wax discs and a heap of unused seal stamps. Someone clearly planned more seals than they used, maybe anticipating a papal jubilee or a mass excommunication. You stifle a chuckle. Unspent stamps in a Vatican chest. Sounds like my leftover office supplies. But then you notice a tiny slip of vellum wedged among the wax-marked Secretum Templorum. You unfold it carefully and read a single line in Latin. Quid est veritas? What is truth? It's hardly an administrative memo. It's more of an open-ended philosophical dare. Fringe commentators argue it's a line from a lost Templar dialogue, hinting at secret ties between the medieval Knights Templar and high clergy. Mainstream historians shake their heads, insisting no credible evidence ties the Templar Secret Archives to the Vatican. Historians still argue whether any Templar documents survived past the lamp's wick expression. The lamp's wick sputters, and you almost cursed. Instead, you lean forward, turning the chest's lid into a small windbreak for your torch. The flicker casts dancing shadows on the seals, making them look alive, breathing a secret language. You lay out a few seals on an empty table, one by one, inspecting each like Pishi-Man cards. Gotta collect all 109 of them. A particularly peculiar seal depicts a dragon and a lily intertwined, an odd clash of ferocity and purity. You wonder if it marks an alliance with a Byzantine prince or some offbeat theological treatise praising both wrath and mercy. Scholars still argue whether that motif belonged to an obscure crusader prince or to an anonymous monk who doodled in the margins. Your eyelids grow heavy, but you resist closing them, because who knows what dreams await if you nod off here. Instead, you press a warm seal against a sheet of blank parchment, careful not to misshape it. The wax adheres, creating an imprint that gleams under torchlight. You trace your fingertip over the fine details, the papal tiara, the crossed keys, the tiny fleur-de-lis siege crevice, a testament to craftsmanship and clerical power. It's a wink from the past, telling you that every document bearing this seal once carried the full might of the Catholic Church. You gather the seals back into their drawers, cues, each one clicking into place with an oddly satisfying thunk. The room falls silent again, save for the settling beeswax and the slight humming in your ears. You rub your tired arms and grin. Guess the real wax museum is underground, and the exhibits never leave. As you step toward the exit, you pause to look back at the open drawers, as if they might whisper one last secret. A coded prophecy, a stolen letter, or a seal that never belonged to any pope. But all you hear is the rustle of dying flames and the soft, settling dust with a last inhale of honeyed wax and metal. You duck through a narrow doorway that leads you onward to the next vault of surprises. Remember the salamander seal and the scroll from the Templars. Those curiosities will accompany you as you venture into the world of forged gospels and charred parchments waiting deeper in these archives. After all, in this place, even a simple seal can change everything. You push through a narrow door whose hinges squeak like a distressed manuscript, and the air shifts, smoky, lingering with the tang of charred parchment. You inhale, tasting the acrid kiss of centuries-old fire, and feel the hairs on your arms stand at attention. Your torchlight sweeps across a low table strewn with warped vellum scraps, their edges curled and blackened as if reluctant survivors of some medieval bonfire. It's the perfect landfill of literary crime scenes, a mainstream fact being that medieval scriptoria routinely recycled or destroyed texts they deemed heretical, especially during the 9th-12th centuries when monastic copyists chased doctrinal purity under orders from councils such as the Fourth Lateran in 1215. Historians still argue whether most of these burnings were systematic book burnings or accidental hearth mishaps. You kneel beside the table, the stone floor cool against your knees in a way that almost soothes the sting of your scraped jeans. Sliding your gloved fingers under a brittle fragment, you feel its stiff grain shift under your touch. It's like crumpling cellophane, but softer, with a teasing whisper of cotton fibers. A sudden tickle of ash descends into your collar, and you joke out loud, "Well, at least I'm getting a free exfoliation treatment." Gentle sarcasm bubbles as you delicately lift the largest scrap, half expecting it to disintegrate in your hands. Instead, it holds together, revealing faded Latin script adorned with charcoal blurbs like a medieval Instagram filter gone horribly awry. You trace the inked grooves. A curious phrase reads "Gospel of the Women," rumored to detail Mary Magdalene's unseen ministry. Fringe theorists love this text, claiming it was forged by an underground sisterhood of nuns around AD 1100 to empower female faith leaders. Skeptics dismiss it as an 1850s forgery slapped together for Protestant sensationalism. Historians still argue whether any authentic proto-feminist gospel ever existed, or if the Church crushed its circulation before dawn of the High Middle Ages. Another scrap catches your Ajad page, referencing Pontius Pilate's private apology for Christ's crucifixion, a text condemned by the Council of Trent in 1546, but known to have circulated in clandestine copies as early as the 8th century. You inhale the smoky residue and imagine watching a 12th century monk hastily toss this into a brazier after hearing thunder in the cloister. Lightning? Nah, just divine displeasure. You shiver, half out of reverence and half from the stale heat radiating off the parchment. On the table's far edge sits an iron candlestick sunk into a patch of soot, its wick long dead. You absently tap it, and a small chunk breaks off, sending a cloud of soot motes dancing in your lantern's glow and SMR teaser crackle that almost lulls you into a micronap, until your elbow nudges a shard of blackened text that resembles a breadcrumb trail. You follow it, uncovering a line in Greek interspersed with marginal doodles of cherubs familiar, yet sprite-like rather than the stern cherub key from section 4. One doodle shows a cherub riding a dragon, like a cartoon superhero. You grin. Proof angels have always had boundless weekend energy. You realize these fragments are more than ash, they're forensic clues in a grand puzzle. You assemble 3 pieces on a nearby oak shelf carved with faint graffiti. CW 1184. Could that be the initials of a forger or a cleanup crew? You angle your torch to reveal a burnt watermark shaped like a lily, a callback to that dragon and lily seal you admired in the wax chamber. It feels like history's wink, reminding you that forgeries and seals dance together in a secret ritual. Nearby, a battered chest stands ajar. You slide it open and peer inside. Jars of faded ochre pigment, dried quill pens with brittle shafts, and a box of iron gall ink, so old it's coagulated into little rock-like globs. You pick up a jar and breathe in the earthy scent, a clove of cinnamon crossed with burnt toast. You quip archival DIY kit. Burn, blend, forge, which prompts a soft echo that sounds suspiciously like canned laughter. In truth, many medieval Forgers were monks with legitimate scriptorium training, stitching together texts to meet patron demands or local clergy's comfort food cravings. Historians still argue whether these money-driven commissions outnumbered ideological forgeries meant to steer church politics. Your torch flickers, and you pad over to a wall lined with wooden rods supporting bundles of charred parchment, tied with soot-stained cords. You tug one loose, and the bindings crack like dry twigs. You let it drop onto the stone shelf, where the scrap's broken edges align with another fragment, as if you've stumbled on a prehistoric jigsaw. The reunited pieces form part of a letter from a bishop complaining about heretical bleedings in his diocese, mainstream papal correspondence from the 13th century, no less. Yet the ink smudges reveal a second hidden layer, a complaint that the bishop's own cathedral chapter circulated fake relics to line their coffers. Fringe proponents claim this double text was hidden via a wax-resist technique known only to an illicit circle of alchemists. Skeptics insist it's a natural bleed-through. Historians still argue whether wax-resist methods were employed intentionally or just accidental overlap. You straighten, dusting soot from your sleeve, and notice a tiny brass plaque embedded in the table. Scriptorium Infernum. The name evokes images of flaming manuscripts dancing like salamanders in Section 5's wax chamber. You pause to let the name settle, imagining a medieval scriptorium that moonlighted as a forger's den. A strand of your hair brushes against your forehead, smelling faintly of recycled candle grease. And you shiver in amused indignation. You'd think I'd get a hairspray sponsor by now. Above you, a narrow skylight grants a slender shaft of moonlight, illuminating motes, drifting like cosmic confetti. You stretch, letting the moonbeam wash your face. The moment feels surreal, soft as lullaby, until you notice smoky footprints embedded in the dust-tiny bootprints, size child small. You kneel to examine them, your breath catching in a hushed whisper. Footprints of a guest scribe. Fringe researchers claim a secret monastery of child copyists existed under Innocent III's nose. Mainstream historians scoff at the idea, citing papal bulls forbidding infant labor. Historians still argue whether any evidence supports the legend of child scribes passing unnoticed through the archives. You pivot and gather several parchment fragments, arranging them on a small folding desk you nearly missed behind an overturned chair. As you align edges, the texts converge into a curious hybrid gospel. Synoptic passages interwoven with Isaac of Nineveh's mystic homilies. It's part mainstream hybrid text medieval compilers loved collating sacred voices and part fringe speculation that these mashups were coded guides to secret pilgrimages. You lean in, tracing the charred letters. They glow orange in the torch's beam. Like embers refusing to die, your eyelids flicker shut. A micro-snooze threatening to take hold in this twilight archive of half-lives and half-lies. You snap them open and grit your teeth. No naps in the forger's den. Instead, you bundle the fragments into a cloth you found tucked in a chest, careful not to mix them up. You tuck the bundle under your arm. It's a scratch of charred vellum, a lullaby, and a warning. Standing. You pat your pockets still, carrying the Templar slip from Section 5. The salamander seal ringing in your mind, the stained snail mucus. Theory crawling back. You smile, knowing these forgeries are not just mischief. They're coded echoes of power plays, theological fashion statements, and the human impulse to rewrite history. You blow gently on the charcoal-flecked desk, sending a soft puff of dust motes spiraling skyward, and prepare to move on as you step away. The flickering torchlight casts the charred fragments' gnarled shapes onto the walls, a silent gallery of medieval misdirection. You hesitate for a heartbeat, listening to the motes settle, then exhale a slow, deliberate breath. The forgeries may be whispers from the edges of orthodoxy, but they remind you that every archive depends on the tension between truth and illusion. With that thought, you close the door behind you, ready to wander onward into chambers where alchemical recipes and forbidden chants await. You slip down a worn stone step and find yourself in a vaulted chamber where light filters through a high, narrow window, landing like a spotlight on glass-fronted cases. The air smells faintly of parchment dust mixed with old aquamarine paint-like, opening a greengrocer's market turned medieval archive. You raise your torch just enough to reveal what lies beneath each pane, illuminated manuscripts that glitter like buried treasure. Mainstream scholars note that by the 8th century, scribes were applying gold leaf to sacred texts both to honor the divine and to catch candlelight during evening readings. Historians still argue whether this luxurious decoration was primarily devotional or also a power play to demonstrate a monastery's wealth and influence. You wander between cases, each one cradling a single folio. One display holds a page from a 9th century gospel book. Lilies and vines rolling across the margins in emerald and ruby pigments. In the corner of the illustration, you spot a tiny snail doodle-in, obvious callback to the snail mucus glue legend you teased out in section 2. This one's more than a cute insect sketch. Fringe enthusiasts claim illuminators used snail slime so thin it was nearly invisible, sticking gold leaf to vellum until the pages practically shimmered with bioluminescence. Skeptics scoff that medieval artists would rather ruin their work than collect snail trails, but you lean in anyway, wondering if that little doodle marks a secret recipe for eternal gilding. Historians still argue whether any like-minded manuscripts contain enough trace elements to prove a snail-based adhesive ever existed. Your fingertips brush the glass as you rest against an oak display table. A well-worn magnifying glass sits atop it, brass rim tarnished by centuries of curious hands. You lift it, catching a stray lock of your hair in its reflection, and peer through it at a minstrel's antiphonary. Tiny cherubic figures dance through the letter B, their wings tipped with silver paint that catches both moonlight and torchlight in a deceptive shimmer. You recall the cherub-faced key from section 1, scowling iron countenance now softened by comparison to these playful sprites. You can almost hear them whisper, "We're much friendlier here." A sleepy grin creeps onto your face as you imagine the monotony of medieval copywork broken only by these impish illuminations. Sudden flicker reveals something extraordinary. In the margin of a Benedictine psalter, you spy a cipher row of tiny triangles, circles, and squares etched beneath a coat of ultramarine paint. You quip. Looks like someone stashed their Sudoku in the Bible, and trace the shapes with your fingertip. Fringe lore insists these symbols are alchemical formulas hiding in plain sight. A pinch of lead, or here. A dribble of mercury there, encoded so casually that papal inspectors would have passed right over. Mainstream art historians counter that. Similar patterns appear in secular European books of hours, suggesting they were decorative flourishes rather than chemical blueprints. Historians still argue whether any of these coded illuminations sprang from an alchemist's workshop, or simply from an artist's whimsy. You dip your torch toward another case showcasing a 12th century bestiary illuminated with gold leaf so bright it could signal ships at sea. Lions and griffins prance under halos of beaten gold, their fur patterns scored with delicate lines that sparkle like spun sugar under light. You inhale, catching that faint hint of almond oil used by illuminators to burnish their leaf mixed with the musk of old leather bindings. You can't resist a sleepy pun, sugar-coated scraps of scripture. Despite the joke, you're awed by the craftsmanship. Gold leaf was pounded to the thickness of a single human hair, then applied with a gilder's tip brush made from squirrel hair. Mainstream records credit Cistercian monasteries for perfecting this technique in the 11th century. But historians still argue whether Eastern Byzantine workshops influenced Western methods earlier than the Crusades. Your torch flickers and you step to a corner, where a single manuscript lies under its own lamp. It's a 14th century book of ours, bound in velvet, its opening page adorned with an archangel with wings of burnished gold. Beneath the image, you notice a faint watermark, a double-headed eagle. That symbol calls back to the silver seal in Section 5, hinting at cryptic ties between imperial iconography and papal art commissions. You lean in, whispering, royal endorsements, or hidden patronage. Fringe speculators imagine secret funding from a Byzantine prince desperate to preserve his lineage's legacy. More pragmatic voices note that watermarks were simply part of paper-making guild practices. Historians still argue whether such watermarks signaled clandestine commissions or merely hopped between regional workshops. You circle back to the main aisle and spot a display of liturgical chant manuscripts. Their vellum pages edged in gold leaf that frames clusters of red and black notation. You close your eyes and let the imagined strains of Gregorian chant intertwine with the shimmer of gilded ink. A warm lull envelops you, perfect ASMR. Territorian till you remember that some chant books were banned during the Counter-Reformation for featuring too many local saint feasts. You joke to the empty room. Censorship by catechism, haven't we come full circle? The contrast between sacred song and institutional control reminds you how light and shadow dance together in these archives near the exit. You pause at a case containing a slim psalter whose margins are alive with alchemical beasts, salamanders, phoenixes, and Ouroboros serpents coiled around Latin verses. The serpent curls echo the snake key you found in Section 4, suggesting a thematic continuity. Wherever a guardian key lies, symbol slithers into the art. You hold your torch low to see if any pigment glows under ultraviolet light there's. No UV lamp down here, of course, but you can almost see alchemical mercury dust under a moonbeam. Fringe devotees argue that these illuminations double as talismans, warding off plague and heresy alike. Skeptics point out that medieval bestiaries often mixed bizarre creatures simply for moral allegory. Historians still argue whether these fantastic beasts ever carried coded instructions for secret sects. You run a gloved hand along the smooth glass of the last display, where a single codex lies open on a velvet cushion. Its gold leaf borders form a frame around a portrait of the Madonna and Child, rendered in cobalt, vermilion, and the palest flesh tones. If you trace the curve of Mary's cheek in miniature, it feels like a lover's caress, and you murmur, "Oh, mate." Painted by a pros. The manuscript bears the footprint of a master illuminator, possibly Jean Pucelle, who brought Parisian style to the papal chapel in Avignon. Historians still argue whether Pucelle personally traveled to Rome or merely influenced local workshops. Through circulated patterns, a breeze tugs at your sleeve, though no obvious source disturbs the air. It carries a faint hint of citrus and cedar, the same cleaning oils used by monks in the 15th century to preserve their art. You inhale, letting the clean scent mingle with centuries of pigment and parchment. The manuscripts seem to hum back at you, their gold edges gleaming like ancient smiles. You quip for the final time, proof that sometimes the pen and the gold really is mightier than the sword. You step back, letting the torchlight fade. As you close the glass cases one by one, its chamber dims, leaving behind only the soft glow of residual moonlight and your steady exhale. Each illuminated page has been both an artwork and a statement of power, a visual hymn and a coded whisper, a mainstream marvel and fringe rebellion. As you turn to leave, you carry the shimmer of gold dust in your mind's eye and the promise of hidden symbols to decode further on this nocturnal pilgrimage. You follow a narrow corridor that curves beneath the echo of your own footsteps, the hush broken only by the distant drip of unseen moisture. Your torch sputters, casting jittery light on a half-hidden alcove where a single lectern holds a rolled codex tied with fraying red silk. The silk ribbon gleams like a heartbeat in the gloom, ominous, tantalizing. You think of the salamander seal from Section 5 and the cherub keys of Section 4. Each symbol promising that what lies here won't be found in any tourist guide. Historians still argue whether the Vatican ever officially cataloged these forbidden codices or simply hid them and forgotten. Stresses to avoid scandal. You unfasten the ribbon with a soft tug and unroll the document across the lecterns. Worn surface, inhaling the scent of aged papyrus mingled with the faint tang of iron gall ink. Mainstream archivists acknowledge that papyrus use declined sharply after the 7th century. Yet here it is, its fibers warm under your fingers as if defying decay itself. You murmur, papyrus making a comeback, Vatican Vintage Edition. Beneath your torch, you make out elegant Greek script in a hand that dates to around AD 200, give or take half a century. The text claims to be the Gospel of Thaddeus, supposedly authored by the lost apostle who journeyed east of the Mediterranean. It's chronicling private teachings of Christ unseen in canonical texts. You lean in, reading a line, and he revealed. To me, a hidden city beneath the olive trees, where the Master walked at dusk. Your breath catches. The idea of secret revelations slumbering beneath olive groves feels at once plausible and preposterous. Fringe enthusiasts assert that Thaddeus traveled to India, founding a nascent church whose liturgy echoes today in careless Syrian Christian communities. Skeptics counter that this scroll is a medieval forgery, likely penned by a monk with a flair for theological fan fiction and access to rare synoptic fragments. Someone's creative writing sample, you joke, imagining a scribe sipping Posca and thinking, let's spice up the Easter message. A faint breeze stirs the scroll's edge, though there's no vent in sight. You pause and smell it, a hint of frankincense, perhaps wafting from the chapel above. Remember how Section 3's labyrinth felt alive with dripping ceilings and hidden frescoes? This alcove's static hush feels like the calm before a storm of revelation. You trace the text further, finding a marginal note in smaller Latin script. Ut invenitur verbum veritatis, that it may find the word of truth. You chuckle, a poetic disclaimer or an ancient SEO tagline. The manuscript's verso bears a second layer of writing barely visible, as if ghosted beneath the primary text. You hold it up to the torch and see a list of names, Thaddeus, Matthias, and most startling Jose's of Cyprus. The implication? An undiscovered companion of Christ, erased from most ecclesiastical records. Mainstream scholars recognize Jose's only as a brother of Jesus mentioned in Mark's Gospel, but here he's cast as a full-fledged apostle with private revelations. Historians still argue whether Jose's ever held any formal role or if his mention was merely a familial footnote. Your fingertip grazes, a spill of brownish-red ink staining the margin like a blood smear or a spilled mulled wine. You tap it and sniff. It smells faintly of the tannins in red wine, not blood. You smirk, dramatic effect, well played. Fringe aficionados claim that early Christian scribes sometimes mixed their own blood into inks for documents of martyr apostles. It's a votive gesture. More prosaic voices argue that red ink came from cinnabar or ochre. Historians still argue whether any genuine blood-infused manuscripts survived the centuries or perished in sacrilegious flames. The scroll's upper edge holds a tiny pressed flower leaf. You think that's surprisingly intact. You gently lift it, mindful of its fragility, and feel a tremor of connection. Someone placed that bloom between these leaves 2 millennia ago, sealing a metaphor of peace. You imagine that scribe, pausing amidst war and pestilence, tucking nature into doctrine. It's a reminder that archives house not just words, but the very breath of those who penned them. You settle on a low stone bench nearby, cradling the lectern edge with one hand and the codex with the other. The bench is carved with an inscription. In archaic Latin, locum silenti, custodite, keep the place of silence. You wiggle your toes, feeling the cool stone through worn fabric. You joke, silence is golden, especially when your audience is a forbidden text. Closed rooms like this once cost more hush money than PayPal indulgences. Your eyes drift down to a footrest where two tiny footprints have been carved child-sized, as if a novice scribe knelt here in training. Maybe the walker followed Thaddeus's footsteps and left this mark centuries later. Fringe lore spins it further, that an order of underground apprentices kept these codices safe through the Dark Ages. Passing them by, hand whisper from parent to child. Skeptics scoff at such clandestine chains, citing PayPal bulls forbidding private custodianship. Historians still argue whether any unbroken lineage of script fosters genuine authenticity. You turn back to the scroll, skimming a section where Thaddeus recounts a private meal at Emmaus. He broke bread, and the flame of truth shone in the breaking. Your chest warms. The line reads like a meditation rather than a dry biography. You murmur, extra bread, extra insight. Beneath that passage, a doodle of two fish curls around the text, an obvious nod to the loaves and fishes miracle, but drawn with an elegance that suggests the hand of a practiced illuminator. You scan its ink and note the florid curves echo the Brahmi script from Indian codices. Fringe scholars argue this signals direct contact between early Christians and Indian scribes. More measured voices suggest its imitation after oral descriptions. Historians still argue whether any real cross-cultural scribal exchange occurred that early. You let the scroll rest, closing it partway so you can carry half the mystery with you. You wonder whether the codex's primary clamp Thaddeus's hidden teachings was ever intended to rival canonical gospels or simply to comfort a small community of believers stranded on the empire's edge. You stand and feel a renewed reverence. This isn't just ink on papyrus. It's a lifeline cast across centuries, a challenge to every accepted narrative. Your torchlight flicks as if in applause. Before you depart, you tuck the ribbon back in place, securing the red silk with a soft tug. You look at the lectern's top, textured from centuries of scrolls and conspiracies, and grin. Thanks for the chat, Thaddeus, you whisper. I'll carry your words forward, buried but not forgotten. You step away, leaving the scroll to its silent vigil. The corridor's gloom embraces you once more, filled with shadows eager to whisper of vaults yet undiscovered. You inhale deeply and feel the weight of unspoken teachings settle in your bones, fueling each step as you venture onward into chambers of alchemy, chance, and cold cases waiting to reveal their own hidden truths. You step into a vaulted hall where the air sags heavy with the memory of smoke and fear, like the aftermath of a bonfire carnival gone wrong. Above you, iron rings hang from chains, resting points for chains once used to shackle heretical books. Before they were tossed onto crackling pyres, mainstream records show that the Roman Inquisition was formally established in 1542 under Pope Paul III to root out doctrinal deviance, seizing and burning forbidden texts in piazzas across Italy. Historians still argue whether its primary mission was genuine orthodoxy or covert political maneuvering, using heresy as a pretext to silence unruly minds. Your boots clatter on flagstones, pitted with ash residues that smell of charred leather and pitch, like a blacksmith's forge where someone forgot the anvil. You lower your torch and catch a flicker of movement. A rusted iron bucket once used to collect confiscated volumes, its interior stained with ash and faded remnants of marbled paper covers. You run a fingertip along its rim, feeling the grit of centuries-old soot under your glove. A cheeky thought crosses your mind. Book burning's PG-13 pyrotechnics for the fearful bibliophile. You chuckle softly, the sound bouncing off stone like a restless spirit. Along one wall stands a hefty wooden rack, hook bearing a steel clasp that once gripped the spines of heretical manuscripts. You trace the curve of one clasp, the same twisted serpent motif you glimpsed in Section 4's key racket's steel darkened by oak smoke. Fringe theorists whisper that some seized volumes contained secret alchemical instructions, disguised as heretical pamphlets meant to overthrow papal power. Skeptics counter that most confiscated texts were simple vernacular Bibles or Protestant tracts. Historians still argue whether any genuinely radical alchemical treatises slip through the Inquisition's dragnet. You approach a low dais where a single charcoal gray lectern rests, its corner gouged by what looks like tooth marks. Leaning down, you spot the abraded imprint of hoof-donkey-sized, indelibly carved in stone. You grin, recalling the scribe's donkey from local legend, the poor beast that, in 1598, supposedly bolted from a secretive scriptorium with a pouch of illicit manuscripts strapped across its back. The story goes that the donkey outran pursuing inquisitors, prompting them to accuse a random goat in a neighboring barnyard instead. You mutter, classic case of mistaken identity, innocent goat becomes scapegoat. The donkey's galloping hooves, so the tale says, echoed down these corridors, convincing terrified clerics that heresy itself had 4 hooves and an attitude problem. A slight breeze unexpected so deep underground rattles the buckles on a chest beside the dais. You sniff, detecting a hint of brimstone and heated iron, as if devilish ambition still clings to the wood grain. On the chest sits a small stack of singed parchment fragments, their edges curled into tight coils like withered petals. You pick up one and uncurl it gently. A code of Inquisition procedures in Latin, penned ca. 1560. It outlines methods for interrogating suspected heretics mainstream. It's administrative protocol that reads like a bureaucrat's fever dream of control. Beneath the dry bullet points, you find a marginal scrawl. Tortura, mentis, maior, stirps. Est torture of the mind is the worst route. The handwriting is shaky, as if penned by a remorseful inquisitor. Fringe enthusiasts claim the scrawl was added by a secret dissident within the Holy Office. Skeptics argue it's a 19th century forgery meant to dramatize church cruelty. Historians still argue whether any genuine internal protest survived. Institutional censorship. You lean back against the dais and let your torchlight brush across the vaulted ceiling, adorned with blackened fresco fragments depicting a stern-faced cardinal pointing to a pile of burning books. The paint glimmers dully beneath your beam, like a memory half forgotten. You imagine a low chant rising from a subterranean, chapel above, perhaps the same one where Section 8's red silk codex rested on its silent lectern. You close your eyes for a beat, letting the rooms hush and the faint drip of condensation craft a lullaby of dread and wonder. A cool mist coalesces at your ankles, carrying the faint coppery scent of spilled ink mixed with whetstone. You crouch to run your palm through it, feeling tiny droplets bead between your fingertips. You joke under your breath. Perhaps inquisitors used this mist to erase their own sins. In reality, secret Inquisition rituals often involved symbolic washing of hands to feign purity before trials. Historians still argue whether these cleansing ceremonies were genuine acts of contrition or purely theatrical gestures. Your torch flickers violently, and you hobble over to a narrow passage sealed by an iron grate. You peer through its bars and spy a dozen small alcoves where pigeonholes once housed confiscated texts awaiting judgment. Most niches are now empty, but one still cradles a leather-bound volume, dime-sized and ominous. Its cover, once stamped with a red wax seal, now shows only cracked leather. You arch an eyebrow. A tiny heresy, big trouble. You reach through the bars, prick your finger, and feel the leather's leathery grit. It reminds you of that precious salamander seal back in Section 5 again. The whispers of alchemy in every artifact beyond the grate. You notice shallow tracks scored into the stone floor and arrow, like the imprints of a small cart with metal. Rims, you follow them deeper into the corridor, where a recessed niche holds a battered box. You lift its lid and discover a trove of prisoner petitions pleas for mercy written on scraps of scrap paper, some stained by tears. One petition from 1602 is signed by Brother Paolo, who begs leniency for distributing books of forbidden reason. You read a line, "I sought knowledge, not rebellion." The script wobbles, ink pooling at the ends of strokes. You sigh, whispering, heartfelt, yet dead on arrival. These petitions confirm that inquisitors often paraded contrition letters to shame communities. Historians still argue whether any of these pleas ever softened sentences, or if they were strictly performative. You feel a subtle thrum underfoot, as if centuries of footsteps, both condemned and condemner still, pulse through the stone. You lean down and press your ear to the floor, half expecting to hear muffled Latin prayers. Instead, you catch the faint hum of distant chanting, like intoning penitential psalms from a chapel above. It reminds you of that chant room in Section 7, where illuminated pages glowed with gold halos. Cupe. Guess nothing scares a sinner more than a donkey on the loose and a good Gregorian chant. Shaking off the chill, you rise and sweep your torch toward a broad 17th century door, carved with the crest of the Holy Office. Its panels are scarred with sword slashes, remnants of an attempted break-in. Local lore says, by Protestant envoys who sought to rescue imprisoned scholars in 1631. Fringe stories claim they used a hidden key from Section 4's Cherub collection to enter. Mainstream historians, though, only mention a minor skirmish in the Borgo neighborhood that never breached the archives. Historians still argue whether those envoys ever got within 100 yards of this door. You take a steadying breath, savoring the mingled scents of ash, ink, and stone. You trace the intricate crest papal tiara above crossed keys, flanked by scales of justice, and murmur, "Justice for the books, not always for the bound." You push the door open, its iron hinges groaning in protest, and step through into a cooler corridor scented with wet limestone. The oppressive heat of inquisitorial flames recedes behind you like a bad memory. Before you leave, you glance back at the hall's empty racks and ash-streaked dais. For a moment, you imagine the screams of seized pages, the crackle of leather writhe in flame, the braying of that mischievous donkey shaking guards to the core. You press your hand to the cold stone, offering a silent vow to remember these vanished voices, the stolen books, and the stubborn spark of knowledge that refused to die. You step away, the distant drip of water lulling you forward, ready to seek out the next vault, one where secret maps of Atlantis or alchemical secrets beckon. But carry this hall's hush with you, a reminder that every archive has its shadows, and every light casts one. You twist a rusted ring on the door latch and step into a circular chamber where the walls curve inward, like the hull of an inverted ship. The air here hums with an undercurrent of ozone and old vellum, sharp and slightly metallic, as if the stones themselves remember lightning strikes. You brush your fingertips along a bronze pedestal at the room's center and find a shallow indentation shaped like a rolled scroll. A single beam of light from an overhead oculus illuminates that spot, spotlighting a dust-coated chest carved with wave-like motifs. Historians still argue whether this chamber was built atop an early Renaissance observatory, or simply a storage alcove repurposed for theatrical effect. You kneel before the chest, inhaling deeply. The scent of salt water drifts in faintly, an odd companion to the musk of aged leather. Mainstream catalogs confirm that the Vatican has acquired nautical charts since at least the 16th century. When popes sponsored Portuguese expeditions and collected maritime maps for diplomatic leverage. Yet none of those official charts hint at a location beyond familiar seas. Fringe aficionados, however, insist that tucked beneath those atlases lies a clandestine petri dish of cartographia. Single parchment pinpointing the sunken city of Atlantis somewhere beneath the Mediterranean's deepest trenches. Your gloved hand hesitates over the chest's latch. It's embossed with twin dolphins framing a fleur-de-lis. You crack it open and lift the lid, revealing a map rolled tight with a crimson ribbon. The ribbon's color shifts under your torch from wine red to blood orange, uncoiling like a promise. You undo the knot and carefully unfurl the chart across. The bronze pedestal, the parchment sliding smooth as silk despite its age. A sleepy grin tugs at your mouth when you notice the map's border, a ring of tiny sea monsters, each drawn with half-open jaws and suspiciously human teeth. You murmur, "Caution, these beasts bite." That's your first joke of the section. And you swear you hear the monsters hiss in mock outrage. By torchlight, you study the map's Mizzen page. At first glance, it looks like any 15th century nautical chart, a compass rose flecked with gold leaf, coastal outlines of Sicily and Crete rendered in precise ink strokes, and small fairgrounds of anchor symbols marking known ports. Then your eye catches a series of concentric circles in open water south of Malta, labeled in ornate Latin, Atlantis Insula. The island sits inside a wobbling circle of waves, painted with cerulean and emerald dyes that still flicker under. Your beam-fringed legend attributes the map to Athanasius, Kircher's secret commission in the 1660s, a Jesuit polymath who claimed to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphs and might have found clues to Atlantis in an alchemical cipher. Skeptics roll their eyes at Kircher's more eccentric theories. Historians still argue whether Kircher ever actually visited these archives or merely spun tales from his Roman study. You lean in closer, the torch's heat kissing the parchment as if encouraging it to release its secrets. Your nose almost touches the ink. Beneath the main island, a scattered cluster of tiny X's hand-drawn in vermilion marks underwater plateaus. You trace one X and note a scribble in the margin, ad profundum, lux veritatis, to the deep, the light of truth. You tip your head, wondering if that phrase was added by a curious early librarian, or scrawled by a captain mapping hidden shoals for hostile fleets. You joke, "Remind me to send Twitter DMs to Poseidon." Imagine sea god diplomacy via direct message modern absurdity in an ancient vault to your right. A smaller inset chart bears the papal crest, showing the same circles but with one peculiar tweak. The island's name is crossed out and replaced with Insula Herodatus, Island of Inheritance. You quirk an eyebrow. That correction suggests someone, perhaps a scoffing cardinal, tried to recast Atlantis not as a lost empire but as the Church's hidden patrimony. Fringe theorists argue that during the 18th century, secretive popes rebranded the site to mask its pagan origins. More conservative voices insist it's a later prank, maybe by bored Vatican clerks. Historians still argue whether the redink emendations date to the 1700s or the early modern period. Your torch sputters, and you lean forward to steady it, revealing microscript stamped along the map's edge. It reads, "Per custodiam verbi," through the guardianship of the word. You pause, remembering that motto from Section 8's Red Silk Codex, both exhorting seekers to guard hidden truths. Maybe the same clandestine circle oversaw these treasures. You swivel the map ever so slightly to reveal faint indentations on the reverse, the ghost of a grid system, perhaps used to triangulate the island's coordinates from known Mediterranean waypoints. It feels like a clandestine GPS for the Renaissance, the original coordinate hacking. Your modern itch flares. You'd love to overlay this on Google Earth and zoom to pixel level clarity. Sadly, no Wi-Fi down here. A cool breeze wafts through. The Oculus. Shifting the ribbons, curl and carrying a scent, your brain translates as oregano and brine. Like a Sicilian taverna on a summer night. You inhale, momentarily transported to sun-bleached cliffs and salty spray. You imagine standing on a small skiff, watching those concentric waves materialize on the horizon before a massive plateau submerges giant columns rising from the deep. Sunburn guaranteed, you joke. Adding sunscreen to your mental packing list for deep-sea adventures. As you trace the map's details, you spot a tiny drawing of a temple facade submerged beneath plotted lines, columns toppled in coral. A cherub face encrusted in shell. It's an echo of Section 1's cherub key and Section 4's cherub rack. Cherubs follow you from iron keys to hidden continents. Fringe scholars claim that silhouette matches ruins off the coast of Cuba, suggesting Plato misremembered his coordinates. Mainstream archaeologists shake their heads, demanding stratigraphic evidence, not cryptic ink drawings. Historians still argue whether any Enlightenment era mariners charted the Atlantic seaboard before forming colonial surveys. Your torch dims again, forcing you to cup your hand around the flame like a protective half-dome. The map's ink dances under the flame's halo, making the meridian lines shimmer as if alive. You squint at a notation in Greek letters: pi, omicron, rho, epsilon, y, alpha, nu, prosopon, roughly caution on the course. It's that blend of Greek and Latin. Hints at a scribal polyglot, maybe a Byzantine mapmaker collaborating with Vatican scholars. Fringe theories speculate that Templar survivors copied secret Byzantine sea charts and hid them here in the 1300s. Skeptics dismiss that timeline as too early for precise Mediterranean hydrography. Historians still argue whether any real Templar Byzantine cartographic alliance ever existed. You carefully roll the map back up, pausing to cradle it like a sleeping infant. The anomaly of a secret Atlantis chart stirs your pulse. What if it's nothing more than a clever Renaissance hoax meant to amuse cardinals? Or what if it points to genuine undersea ruins waiting for remotely operated submersibles to confirm? Either way, the map embodies the very tension that breathes life into these archives. The dance between fact and fancy, reason and myth. You tie the crimson ribbon once more and place the map gently back in its chest, letting the bronze lid settle with a reassuring thud. The beam from the Oculus shrinks to a sliver as clouds glide overhead, casting the chamber into soft half-light. You stand, brushing dust from your knees, and whisper, "Good night, Atlantis." The walls feel cool against your back as you step away, carrying the map's concentric circles in your head like a secret lullaby. You head toward an unmarked archway at the chamber's edge, where the next vault awaits, perhaps one draped in occult formulas or hidden chants. Okay? But remember this: beneath every official seal and forged gospel, there may lie a cartographic whisper of lost worlds, inviting you to dive deeper. You push through a hanging tapestry emblazoned with a golden sun and step into a low-ceilinged laboratory chamber that smells of sulfur and whetstone. Like a cathedral fused with a volcanic grotto, glints of copper and pewter catch your torchlight. Crucibles of thick ceramic rest on iron tripods, their rims crusted with residue from centuries of experimental fire. A narrow workbench runs along one wall, cluttered with glass vials half filled with powdered minerals, flasks of murky liquid, and tattered notebooks scribbled in cramped Latin and Italian. Historians still argue whether medieval Vatican librarians ever truly understood these recipes, or merely hoarded them as curiosities. You settle against a damp nook and notice an open codex spread on a tilted stand. The pages are scrawled with alchemical symbols, circles intersecting triangles, serpent-embracing phoenix sketches, and the legendary squared circle design said to guide practitioners through transmutation. A mainstream fact. Pope John 22 ordered translations of Pseudo-Geber's alchemical treatises into Latin in the early 14th century, fueling an obsession with turning base metals into silver and gold. You trace the faded ink with your fingertip, the symbols crackling under the pressure of your curiosity. A chipped vial holds a dusty rose powder labeled aurum anima, or gold of the soul. You lift it carefully, wicked, a small cloud of pigment that swirls in your torch's glow. The label bears an annotation in a different hand, written in red ink, used with sal, ammoniac, and mercury. Fringe lore claims this is the philosopher's stone formula, hidden by a secretive cardinal who vowed to free the church from earthly debts. Skeptics, though, point out that mercury was a common elixir ingredient, not immortal magic. Historians still argue whether any Vatican recipe ever produced even a trace of real gold. Your eyes drift to a smudged parchment pinned to the wall, a diagram of an alembic apparatus with boiler, condenser, and receiver sketched in charcoal. You joke softly. The original distillery, no craft beer here. The drawing is annotated with steps. Heat the mixture under a new moon. Cool with snow from Mount Etna, then distill 3 drops at dawn. Such precise timing fits modern fringe. Theories that medieval alchemists tracked lunar cycles for magical potency. Mainstream scholars concede that medieval laboratories did reference lunar phases, but historians still argue whether the intent was practical chemistry or symbolic ritual. Beside the codex sits a small wooden box, inscribed elixir cardinalis, the cardinal's elixir. You lift its lid and uncover 5 glass vials, sealed with black wax. Each holds a viscous amber liquid that catches the torchlight like suspended sunsets. You uncork one and inhale. The aroma is warm honey, crossed with burnt rosemary and a hint of bitter almonds. A cheeky thought surfaces, Botox in a bodily eternal, youthful glow. Popes only. The notebook warns. Take 1 drop sublingua weekly. Longevity assured. Fringe rumor credits this elixir to Cardinal Paluzzi, who supposedly drank it daily and lived to 112. Mainstream records, however, place his death at 72. Historians still argue whether life extension claims were promotional hype or sincere devotional experiments. You swivel your torch to reveal a low stone basin etched with concentric lifts. It's half filled with murky green liquid flecked with gold dust. You peer inside and spy tiny bubbles rising like miniature airships. A note pinned beside it reads, Aqua Philosophorum, Lave Manus Ante Orationem, water of the philosophers. Wash hands before prayer. You dip a gloved finger and touch the liquid to your lips, tangy, metallic, spiked with saffron. It tastes like a morning espresso, blended with old pennies. Cue quip. Holy hydrating serum, no moisturizer needed. Yet you wonder, was this a literal anointing water meant to sanctify relics, or a base testing reagent for metallurgical purity? Historians still argue whether Aqua Philosophorum served devotional or chemical ends. Above your head, a series of small wooden plaques bear Latin mottos. Visita interiora terrae, visit the interior of the earth. Recta fecundo in Venis. Occultum lapidem, by rectification you will find the hidden stone. You smile at the echoes of that papal seal's prophetic prophecy from section 5, where marginalia hid cryptic verses. The mottos here could be spiritual metaphors or literal instructions to dig beneath Vatican floors. Fringe fanatics claim, A. Hidden subterranean laboratory beneath this room, stocked with retorts and crucibles still warm from secret work. Religious conservatives insist no such basement exists. Historians still argue whether any crypt beneath this chamber ever housed an alchemist's womb. Your torch flickers as you spread out a vellum sheet of recipes, a list of ingredients for the philosopher's stone, including red ginseng root, purified mercury, and the legendary limpid tears of a winged dragon. You laugh under your breath. Dragon tears Herods must be sold out. Yet the recipe's care is genuine. Each ingredient is weighed in scruples, and the text instructs the alchemist to recite psalms while mixing. That fusion of prayer. An experiment underlines how chemistry and faith blurred for medieval scholars. Historians still argue whether ritual incantations were mandatory steps or pious extras. Small alcove by the bench holds dried herbs tied in bundles. Rosemary, betony, and mugwort. You rub a strand of mugwort between your fingers and breathe in its bittersweet aroma. The notebook claims mugwort's vapor stimulates the inner fire needed for transmutation. Fringe herbalists believe these plants were also used to brew a wine of immortality drunk by the cardinal alongside his amber elixir. More conservative voices note that mugwort's primary use was in medicinal incense to ward off pests. Historians still argue whether medieval apothecaries valued these herbs for alchemical or therapeutic reasons. You lean back, letting the hush envelope you like a velvet cloak. The lab's iron racks groan under the weight of mysterious apparatus. And you catch yourself wondering what success tasted like liquid gold shimmering in a glass, keyed, or the longer life of a cardinal smiling in aged marble. You pocket a small piece of broken retort glass, smudged with residue that might be cinnabar or rust. It's less souvenir, more witness. Evidence that someone here believed in the promise of turning earth into elixir. A breeze drifts along the stone floor, stirring up a swirl of ash, dust, and alchemical powder. You watch the cloud shrink under your torch's steady beam, feeling it settle like a benediction. You whisper, "May these formulas rest until someone brave enough to wield them arrives." With one last glance at the crochet diagrams and amber files, you step from the chamber, carrying the memory of crucibles and coded recipes as you venture on to the next vault. You slip through a narrow archway hung with faded velvet drapes and enter a hushed chamber whose walls curve inward in gentle concave shapes, as though designed to cradle every echo. The air here is thick with the soft tang of aging vellum and the faint resonance of distant prayers, like a half-remembered lullaby. You pause, letting your breath blend with the silence, then softly intone a fragment of the Lux Aeterna, chant just a few syllables curling around the chamber like smoke. It feels oddly intimate, as if the very stones are leaning in too. Catch each note. Mainstream sources record that Gregorian chant crystallized in the 8th and 9th centuries under Pope Gregory I's influence, standardizing liturgical music across Europe for uniform worship. Historians still argue whether Gregory, quote, himself composed melodies or simply commissioned their consolidation. Your torch's glow dances on rows of glass-fronted cases, housing chant books written in simple neumes, squiggles, and dots that map melody, without modern notation. One case bears a label, Antiphonarium Mysterium, whose title promises the unknown. Fringe rumor holds that these mystery chant collections contain melodies so potent they could heal fevers, mend broken bones, or lull epileptic fits into slumber. Skeptics roll their eyes at the idea of sonic surgery performed by monks. Historians still argue whether any such healing vibrations had measurable effects or were simply placebo. You draw closer to a slender lectern where a single, large cure book lies open. Its vellum pages are scored with musical staves and reed ink, rubrics indicating where to breathe and when to pause. You lean in and run your fingertips lightly over the notation, feeling the tiny indentations beneath the skin of your finger. A sleepy quip escapes your lips. High-tech braille for medieval earphones. The lectern's base bears a carved inscription, Cantus Sacri, -1245. Anchoring this treasure firmly in the High Middle Ages when chant reached its zenith of monastic perfection above you. The dome ceiling is painted with faint frescoes of cherubs holding scrolls of music, their cheeks plump with hushed expectation. Do you recall that cherub key from Section 4 whose iron countenance judged you? These cherubs offered gentle invitations instead of stern admonitions. You whisper, "Seems like the cherub lobby has two factions." Modern microphones and mixing boards might envy the natural acoustics here. Every note you hum bounces off the walls in a warm reverberation that could soothe insomnia. A narrow side table holds a small stack of fragile folios labeled Quantas Exili, chants for exiles and pilgrims. You lift one and carefully unfurl it on your lap, the parchment crackling softly. The chant begins Exilium ut dultito, promising sweetness in exile. You close your eyes and let yourself hum the opening phrase, noticing how your chest vibrates like a tuning fork. Fringe devotees claim that medieval pilgrims sang these chants at dawn to stave off seasickness and desert heat. Skeptics point out there's no clinical trial confirming anything more than moral support. Historians still argue whether these chants functioned as mnemonic devices or genuinely altered physiology. Your torchlight flickers across a small alcove where a broken wooden box holds fragments of wax cylinders, the 19th century early audio. Recordings of chant experiments. You lift one cylinder, its surface pitted with age, and run your fingernail gently across it. A single warped groove catches your touch. You joke, "Grammy history right here. Best medieval remix." Though Edison's cylinder patent dates to 1877. Mainstream records show that clerical musicians experimented with phonographs to preserve ancient chant in the late 1800s. Historians still argue whether those early recordings suffered too much distortion to capture authentic medieval melodies. You rise and stroll past a narrow passage leading to Section 9's Inquisition Hall, thinking how these chants once whispered through dogged corridors where heretical books burned. Here, no flame threatens. Instead, exiled melodies coexist alongside coastal maps and alchemical recipes you've already encountered. That interweaving of sacred sound and forbidden text feels emblematic of this entire nocturnal pilgrimage. Spotting a low stone bench carved with a swirl of musical neumes, you settle down and touch the bench, imagining monks kneeling here while a soloist's drone floated above them. A sleepy grin spreads on your face as you briefly hum a drone, testing the resonance. Then lean back to let your ears absorb the chamber's natural hum. A subtle breeze stirs, carrying the faint aroma of frankincense from Section 8's Codex alcove. You quip frankincense, world's oldest scent, throw on a shelf above. You notice a small metal bracket holding a vellum strip stamped with a curious symbol, a 5-pointed star interlaced with a cross of keys. The symbol evokes the papal insignia from Section 5's wax seals, as though signifying that these chants were approved at the highest level or, at least, smuggled through papal scrutiny. Fringe scribes insist that the star-cross symbol marked chants blessed by a secretive brotherhood, who believed sound itself was sacred matter. Skeptics insist it's purely decorative. Historians still argue whether any medieval confraternity of chanters ever operated independently of the official liturgy. Your gaze drifts to a case labeled Chorus Excommunicati, songs, banned under the 16th century reform of Council of Trent for being too ecstatic or too local. You press your cheek against the cool glass and study a fragment of the Alleluia ad predicandum. You imagine the chant's flourishes, rising so high that listeners felt transported beyond the nave. Fringe accounts claim these excommunicated melodies summoned healing visions of saints. Mainstream decrees explain they were banned only because local parishioners sang them during festivals rather than formal liturgy. Historians still argue whether the bans were doctrinal or simply a crackdown on regional pride. You stand and softly intone the opening of that Alleluia, letting the syllables hang in the air. Alleluia. The chamber catches the echoes, and you close your eyes, feeling the chant's gentle thrumming, as if it were a heartbeat beneath your ribs. For a moment, you drift, imagining fields of vellum stretching out behind closed cathedral doors. Thousands of voices raised in harmony. Opening your eyes, you spot a lone manuscript on a small podium amidst pages edged in silver leaf, titled Liber Curativis. You approach and find horsetail sage, K, and even homely time noted in red ink along the margins of certain antiphons, though to be sung only after brushing one's tongue with herbs. It's a quirky detail. Fringe herbalists claim that the vibrations of these chants activated the medicinal oils in the mouth, creating a kind of sonic tincture. Skeptics laugh at the idea of singing time lozenges. Historians still argue whether any liturgical performance included herbal preparation as part of the ritual. Your eyelids grow heavy with both the chant's lingering echo and the weight of downtime deep below Vatican floors. You perch on the bench, humming the Lux Eterna once more, and feel an odd clarity seep into your mind. The chamber seems to pulse with possibility of healing, memory, and perhaps a sliver of magic. A gentle hush settles as you close the codex and lower your torch, before you slip away. You trace a neume with your fingertip on the bench's curve, a final callback to the tracings you made on section 7's illuminated manuscripts. You whisper, "May these melodies carry me home," and then you rise, pocketing the memory of resonant stone and forbidden song. The chamber fades behind you, but its gentle vibrations linger, guiding you onward toward the last cold cases and hidden reflections. Awaiting in next section. You step through a grand oak door carved with papal tiaras into a wide chamber half lit by a series of green-shaded banker's lamps. The air feels more antiseptic here, tinged with archival cleaner and a faint hint of fresco dust like. You accidentally wandered into a conservation lab next door to the Sistine Chapel. You inhale deeply, tasting that clean chemical edge, and remind yourself that this is where cold cases rest. Mysteries no archivist has cracked. It's a mainstream fact that Michelangelo Buonarroti penned over 3,000 letters in his lifetime. Correspondences that offered rare glimpses of his temperamental genius as he wrestled with marble and paintbrush alike. Historians still argue whether some of those letters reveal his true intentions behind certain Sistine Chapel scenes, or if they're just pained progress reports on a backbreaking commission. You cross the room. Your footsteps muffled, unpatterned. Carpet laid over cold stone, and approach a long steel table strewn with folders labeled by century and subject. One folder marked Michelangelo, 1520s, sits open. Its manila edges dog-eared and whispered secrets pressed between its pages. You lift a sheet and find a draft letter written in his florid cursive, a heated complaint about stubborn plaster. That delayed his fresco work, followed by a postscript. I remain, ever your humble servant, with secrets yet untold. You pause, imagining Michelangelo nibbling his quill as he whispered curses at the peeling stucco. You joke. Even Renaissance masters had renovation woes. HGTV. Eat your heart out. Beside the letter lies a small sealed envelope stamped with the same double-headed eagle you saw etched into the vellum watermark in Section 7's illuminated manuscripts. You crack it open. and inside is a cramped sketch in black chalk. Two hands reaching toward each other across a gap. Anathematicus style leerily reminiscent of the creation of Adam, but rendered with rough urgency. You hold it close, feeling the chalk's gritty dust sift onto your glove. A sleepy pun floats to your lips. Michelangelo's rough draft God and Man, outtakes only. Fringe whisperers claim this sketch reveals a deleted Arms of Adam motif that never made it onto the ceiling, suggesting a hidden theological message. Skeptics insist it's just a preparatory doodle with no deeper meaning. Historians still argue whether any of Michelangelo's discarded sketches carry intentional iconographic shifts or were merely structural studies. You set the sketch aside and lean against a filing cabinet whose latch clicks under your weight. The cabinet hums faintly, likely climate-controlled, doing its part to preserve fragile parchment. You press your palm to its cool metal and feel tiny vibrations, as if the archives themselves are whispering. Ahead, a narrow row of shelves holds leather-bound volumes, marked case files, unresolved. You slide out a volume labeled Map of Etruscan Tunnels and inhale the spine's musty bouquet. It carries the scent of aged leather mixed with Lovecraftian intrigue like your bookstore's most arcane shelf. You unfold a brittle map showing hidden passages under the Vatican gardens. Fringe theorists insist these tunnels once carried stolen Roman relics to safe houses. Mainstream archaeologists scoff, citing no physical evidence of such passages. Historians still argue whether any secret corridors truly snake beneath the gardens, or if they're merely mythic routes trafficked in Gothic novels. Your torchlight flickers as you move down a long row of steel racks. You spot a shallow tray marked Disappeared Cardinals, and your heart skips. Inside are letters from 14th century prelates who vanished without formal exile or execution, no records of trial. No graves, just an abrupt end to their correspondence. You lift one letter, its edges browned by time, and read a line. If I do not write again, let this serve as testament to the foiled consistory. You can't help but quip, foiled literally and figuratively. Could these cardinals have been locked away? Their papers buried here to prevent scandal? Historians still argue whether any secret incarcerations occurred within Vatican walls, or if these disappearances were simple reassignments lost in bureaucratic shuffle. A low hum draws your attention to a climate-controlled glass case, where a single folded sheet lies under UV pride of glass. A placard reads, Michelangelo's Lacon Addendum. You peer inside and see a list of names, ancient sculptors, fabled artisans, and someone named S.D. scribbled in the margin. You remember the Per Custodiam Verbi motto from Section 10's Atlantis map. Guardianship of the word echoes here as guardianship of the form. You imagine Michelangelo adding this list as acknowledgments or secret collaborators. You joke. Michelangelo's Cruz DS, some dude's sidekick. Fringe researchers contend these initials stand for Stefano da Sassoferrato, little-known sculptor who helped Michelangelo carve the Vatican's Belvedere torso. Others dismiss the theory, insisting no archival proof ties Sassoferrato to Michelangelo. Historians still argue whether any assistants deserve co-credit on his masterpieces. Soft click reminds you of Section 4's key rack and Section 5's wax seals. Here, a small key emerges from a tiny glass jar labeled Access Restricted. You lift it and examine the bow. A delicate cross entwined with olive branches. It's no cherub, but it feels intimate, almost prayerful. You wonder what lock it once turned. Maybe a cabinet holding letters from Renaissance, spies, informants who penned exposes of Ottoman plots to sack Rome. You tuck the key in your pocket, promising yourself you'll come back later. But for now, your attention shifts to another shelf, where a series of portfolios lie stacked like poker cards. You slide out a portfolio, marked unsolved litigations. 1690s and carefully lift 2 sheets, joined by a battered paperclip. One contains a petition from a widow, claiming her late husband's death was orchestrated by a jealous cardinal. The second is a draft papal response, red-ink scrawl, trailing off mid-sentence. If you read the final words, "We shall resolve this." But truth's best buried. You chuckle. Vatican euphemisms, burying truths, not bodies. Fringe accounts contend the cardinal's nephew disposed of the evidence, while skeptics argue the widow's tale lacked credibility from the start. Historians still argue whether any illicit power struggles in that era led to disappearances masked as divine will. Your eyes drift to a sealed bronze canister stamped with a fleur-de-lis resting on a high shelf. You tug it down and find inside a folded piece of parchment with a tiny sketch, a cherub wearing a helmet and carrying a scroll. It calls back to Section 1's cherub key that glowered at you. You laugh softly. Cherub goes to war. Could this be an early satirical drawing lampooning papal soldiers? Fringe theorists love the idea of medieval political cartoons hidden beneath layers of varnish. More sober voices argue that any satire was strictly confined to secular circles. Historians still argue whether the Church tolerated internal satire among its own ranks. You lean back against a leather chair straight from an archivist's upstairs office and stretch your tired limbs. The lamplight pools around you, forming a small island of warmth amid the chilly air. You slip your hand into your pocket and feel the weight of the tiny key, the chalk dust from the black sketch, and the irony-laden letters you flick through. All this cold case material reminds you that archives are not just vaults, but living conversations between past and present. You rise and flip through a final folder labeled Enigmatic Portraits, 1500 to 1520, within our grainy reproductions of drawings attributed to Michelangelo, an uncommissioned self-portrait etched in sanguine that scholars still argue might be his only surviving likeness. You hold the reproduction close, letting the old paper's warmth seep into your palm. You joke, Michelangelo's Tinder profile pic would swipe right for more sculptures. A soft chime from the climate control unit signals the end of your visit. You take a slow, deliberate breath, letting the hush of unopened letters and unsolved mysteries settle in your mind. You step back, leaving the steel table, the locked jars, and the vault teeming with half-whispered secrets behind you. As you pass the oak door once more, you feel a quiet thrill. These cold cases may never be closed, but they're here, waiting, letters unread, sketches unseen, keys unloved, each one a heartbeat in the Vatican's concealed harmonic. You slip through a glass door into a brightly lit control room where the hum of servers replaces the echo of dripping water, and the scent of cooling fans mingles with faint ozone-like, standing inside a futuristic chapel for books. Rows of high-resolution scanners sit atop polished tables, each one cradling a century-sold codex beneath a dome of soft LED light. You inhale, tasting the sterile promise of preservation, and almost expect to hear digital cherub wings brushing against cooling vents. A callback to the iron cherub key that once glowered at you in Section 1. An archivist gestures to a massive touchscreen display showing live scans of a vellum folio from the 12th century. Heat-masked cameras glide over gold leaf, capturing every microgroove in the illuminated margins. The same snail mucus glue traces you strapped to memory back in. Section 2. Mainstream reports note that the Vatican Library began its digitization project in 2007, aiming to scan over 80,000 manuscripts by 2020, making them accessible worldwide for the first time. You murmur. From hidden vaults to global WIF, talk about an extreme makeover. On a side table, a sleek white box labeled Quantum Reflectance Imager hums quietly. Fringe rumor claims this device can reveal invisible ink concealed beneath layers of soot and mold, decoding lost marginalia from early apostolic letters. Skeptics scoff that quantum scanning for archives is as real as a philosopher's stone recipe. But you note the small brass plaque on its base. Project Speranza, 2019. Historians still argue whether such advanced imaging will actually uncover new texts or simply amplify mirages in damaged parchment. You step closer to a mounted display, where an ornate key-shaped USB drive rests in a velvet-lined alcove. Its handle is fashioned like the fleur-de-lis key from Section 4, a modern echo of iron sentinels that once locked secret chambers. Instead of wards and wards of steel, this digital key encrypts terabytes of fragile scans, controlling access. 2 hidden codices. You smile at the symmetry. Tiny iron keys guarding papal secrets, now paralleled by encryption keys protecting pixelated pages. The archivist swipes a finger across the screen, zooming into a section of text too faint for the naked eye. You watch as software algorithms enhance faded strokes, ghostly letters reappearing on screen. You joke, OCR for the soul of history. Yet you can't help but wonder if these algorithms might hallucinate words much like the Fringe claim. That scriptorium forgers sometimes hid fake prophecies in medieval margins. Historians still argue whether algorithmic reconstructions can be trusted, or if they risk introducing fresh forgeries in digital form. A cool breeze drifts from an open rack of microfilm readers behind you, carrying a tang of developer solution and a whisper of nostalgia. Someone placed a second-hand microfilm scanner among cutting-edge devices, saw nod to analog guardianship before the age of terabytes. You recall the cryogenic chill of Section 3's labyrinth vaults, where scholars still argued about the best way to store papyrus. Here, debate rages over microfilm versus digital masters. You quip analog, because even bytes need grandparents. Across the room, another station displays a 3D laser scan of a lead bulla seal from Section 5. The software rotates the image, revealing every dent and engraving on the bulle's scalloped edge. You trace the virtual crown of the papal tiara. On screen, feeling the click of your mouse ripple through the seal's embossed crosses and keys. It's tactile in its illusion, an ASMR twist of precision scanning. Fringe enthusiasts posit that machine learning could reconstruct lost wax residues to recipes for hidden prophetic messages once buried in the seal's grooves. Mainstream conservators insist that physical analysis remains irreplaceable. Historians still argue whether virtual facsimiles can capture the full materiality of ancient artifacts. You move to a corner where a series of tablets play georeferenced images of maps. One overlay shows Section 10's concentric circles marking Atlantis. Insula, floating above Mediterranean bathymetric data. A GI specialist toggles layers, blending 15th century ink with modern sonar scans. You murmur, digital deep dive. But then you pause. Will these layers dissolve the mystique, or will they inspire new queries, new legends about sunken empires? Historians still argue whether digital mapping will confirm Fringe cartography or dismiss it as Renaissance pranksterism. The room's lighting dims slightly as a projector comes to life, casting a holographic chant book from Section 12 onto a translucent screen. You lean forward, mesmerized as neumes float in midair, each notation glowing with spectral intensity. A soft, synthetic voice intones a snippet of Lux Aeterna, filling the room with digital reverberation. It's uncanny, ASMR acoustic. Mirage, you crack a sleepy grin when your playlists auto-remix history. Yet you wonder, does hearing a chant from a server cage diminish its sacred power or open a new portal for worship? Historians still argue whether virtual acoustics can replicate the spiritual resonance of stonewalled chapels. Nearby, a vault of cloud storage hums with activity. Lines of code scroll-down monitors, handling backups and metadata tagging. A sign above reads, Custodia Veritatis 2.0. You catch a whiff of fresh coffee from the archivist's lounge next door, mixed with the faint must of night shift hours. You, Josh, barista-fueled philology. But in earnest, you admire the dedication, digitizers tracing every gold leaf edge, metadata librarians annotating every saint's feast day in thousands of codices. The tension between the librarian's digital zeal and your own devotion to tangible pages makes your heart thrum in a minor. You pause at a workstation where a young archivist gently lifts a steam-cleaned leaf from an open scanner bed. She whispers, "Careful, this is leaf 227 of the Codex Gigas fragment." You steady the page with tweezer tips and watch as hyperspectral light peels back layers of grime, revealing hidden glosses in faded terrain script. You quip, "Underneath every dust mote lies a potential heresy." She smiles, and for a moment you share the clandestine thrill, the possibility that technology might unearth a lost apostolic letter, or the scribe's own doodle, silent scholar from centuries past reaching through time. You walk to a window overlooking a quiet courtyard, where moonlight glints off travertine balustrades. Inside, digital archivists hover over screens. Outside, the stones remember emperors and early custodians. You press your palm to the glass, feeling the cool barrier between analog memory and digital eternity. You murmur, which world truly holds the past? The servers were back, as if answering only in ones and zeros. Before you leave, you touch the enchanted rack of USB keys, modern cherub keys in their velvet alcove. The sheen of iron has given way to polished metal and soldered circuits, but the promise remains to guard the archive's deepest secrets. You wonder if any encryption can outlast the slow decay of technology better than the slow decay of parchment. Historians still argue whether digital preservation is the ultimate scriptorium or just another layer of obsolescence waiting to be hacked. You gather your belongings, your mental map of snail slime adhesives, salamander seals, forged gospels, chanted echoes, cold case letters, and secret map sand. Step back into the stone corridors. The server's glow recedes behind the glass door, and the hush of ancient archives welcomes you once more. You inhale the mix of dust and electronic air, savoring the tension between pixel and parchment, algorithm and alchemy. You trudge onward, deeper into the Vatican's hidden recesses, the future of every secret hanging on these digitized threads. The path ahead promises more wonders, perhaps a hidden codex only AI can piece together, or a chant only scanners can infuse with new life. Whatever awaits, you know the archives keep breathing, an analog pulse and digital heartbeat alike. You pause in a final corridor where the smooth travertine underfoot feels like an old friend, its surface warmed by centuries of footsteps that once traced these same stones. The air here is quieter than anywhere you've been, less the hum of servers, less the hiss of dripping water, and more the gentle susurration of dust motes drifting in stray shafts of moonlight. You lean against the wall and close your eyes for a moment, letting the cool stone cradle you like a lullaby. A distant draft brings the faintest whisper of lemongrass from Section 2's mossy vault. And you smile to yourself. If archives were scented candles, this one would be Eternal Archive, with a hint of snail slime and papal incense. You open your eyes and remember the chair-faced key from Section 1, the way its iron gaze dared you to unlock forbidden chambers. Here, the corridor walls are lined with shallow niches, each echoing a different guardian. A salamander-shaped seal from Section 5 still smirks in relief sculpture. A tiny dragon serpent key from section 4 rests on a pedestal of shadow, okay? And a single chipped lectern from section 8, the Codex of Thaddeus, stands hollow. These silent sentinels seem to acknowledge your presence with a patient vigil, as though you're the latest in a long line of pilgrims. Sort of like a papal red carpet, you murmur, only with more dust and fewer photographers. Ahead, a narrow opening framed by half-erased frescoes leads you into a rounded alcove where the glow of the digital control room fades into memory. Instead, you're surrounded by glass jars from Section 6's Forger's Den, each containing faded pigments and burnt vellum testaments to texts erased and reborn. One jar still holds shards of the Gospel of the Women, its charred page edges curling like a defiant smile. Fringe lovers swear this scrap holds the earliest proto-feminist sermon. Skeptics shrug and call it 19th century fanfiction. Historians still argue whether any genuine script ever empowered medieval women beyond the cloister. You tap the jar with a soft clink and joke. Mic drop Middle Ages edition. The alcove's curves guide you downward, and you pass the spot where Section 7's illuminated manuscripts once gleamed under glass. You can almost feel the ghost of gold leaf brushing your fingertips, the faint tug of a snail slime adhesive once used to stick precious sheets of metal to page. You tease yourself. Best library hack ever, DIY gilding. No YouTube tutorial needed. A low hum beneath the floor recalls the chant chamber from Section 12, where neumes and antiphons hovered in the air like glowing filaments. You pause, pressing your ear to the stone, and half hear the memory of a hallowed predicendum echoing out of time. A lamp flickers ahead, pointing the way to a final nexus, the cold case room from Section 13. There, the steel table waits, under green lamps, laden once more with manila folders and ghostly reproductions of Michelangelo's letters and sketches. You brush your hand over an empty envelope stamped with the double-headed eagle watermark from Section 7, recalling how a simple doodle could ignite centuries of scholarly debate. You chuckle softly. Even high art geniuses needed snail trail, glue, and secret climate control. You step into the heart of the corridor, where a single display case holds a modern USB key forged in the shape of a fleur-de-lis digital, heir to the iron keys of Section 4 and the wax seals of Section 5. You lift the lid and cradle the drive in your palm, imagining it as the final keeper of this entire pilgrimage. Inside lie trillions of pixels, scans of codices, chants, maps of Atlantis, forgers, fragments, alchemical recipes, and cold case files. A mainstream fact: the Vatican Archives span more than 85 miles of shelving and house some 80,000 volumes, a repository so vast it defies singular comprehension. Historians still argue whether complete digitization can ever do justice to materiality and scent to the weight and texture of history. You press the USB key to your chest like a heartstone, and your torchlight flickers in the distance as though in farewell. The corridor behind you grows darker, but before you turn away, you trace your fingertips along the glass shelf where the drive rested. You imagine tiny cherub wings fluttering against the plastic edge, a gentle digital ASMR that hums with promise. Modern sentinels, you whisper, still guarding papal secrets, one bite at a time. You take a final step, exhaling slowly as you exit the corridor and feel the rough-hewn arch of the entryway settle behind you. The hush of the vault yields to the low murmur of the world above Swissguard footsteps, distant chapel bells, the breath of a city that has lived 1,000 lives yet still wakes each morning. You smile, letting each memory linger like a bookmark in your mind, and prepare to carry these whispered treasures back into daylight. You move into a quieter hall, where the stones are softer and the air feels less urgent. Each breath carries a gentle weight, as though you are inhaling the slow pulse of centuries instead of the hurried heartbeats of discovery. Your steps falter into a calm rhythm, and every echo fades into a background hum, like a distant Gregorian chant lulling you toward rest. Thought by thought, the images of snail slime adhesives and dragon-tangled seals soften, becoming wisps of golden dust dancing in the half-light of memory. In this hush, you sense the archive's true gift, not only the preservation of words and maps and melodies, but the quiet that blooms between them. The secrets you've held, charred fragments, hidden codices, prophetic marginale, settle into gentle repose, tucked into the archive's vast embrace. You feel a warmth in your chest, a tender reassurance that each secret remains protected, each whisper safe beneath these ancient vaults. Let your thoughts drift across illuminated pages and silent keys, across burnt vellum and digital screens. Each memory is a step, a soft echo guiding you back to the surface, back to the world's bright edge. There is no rush, just the slow unwinding of centuries beneath your skin as you turn to leave. The corridor's shadows reach out in quiet farewell, their lines lengthening until all that remains is the soft glow of your own heartbeat. Close your eyes and breathe, letting the archive's hush carry you to a gentle landing. When you open them again, daylight will feel new, softly filtered by the weight of centuries behind you. Sleep comes as a pale promise, a calm unraveling of yesterday's mysteries and tomorrow's wonders. Now, rest, knowing these secrets remain safe, held in the archive's patient silence, whispering their stories only to the bravest dreamers. End of script. Sweet dreams.